Having crossed paths with Chief Justice John Roberts recently, it got me to thinking, if it wasn't for him, the stakes in this presidential election would be an awful lot lower. If Roberts had not decided to shock the world, Obamacare would be dead. When you consider that the 4 dissenting justices in the Obamacare Supreme Court decision went beyond what most observers had expected by declaring not just the individual mandate, but the entire law unconstitutional, the federal government's seizure of 15% of the nation's economy would have ended if Roberts had seen fit to simply do the same thing as his fellow strict constructionist travelers and even one centrist on the highest court of the land. True, you say, but that's just Obamacare. How about all the rest of this president's programs and policies? The stimulus, the onslaught of far-reaching energy and small business regulations, a foreign policy of distancing our friends and embracing our adversaries, and a host of other policies reflecting the leftist ideology of this most leftist of all American presidents. Well, the stimulus was largely a failure, but it's history. And there will be no follow-on and no significant new leftist legislation as long as the House continues to be controlled by the opposite party. The coal industry is on life support, but no president will be able to stand in the way of the explosion in natural gas discovery and production. A foreign policy of disengagement and appeasement will certainly accelerate our already weakening standing in the world. But there are some things that any president will be compelled to do whether he likes it or not, such as standing with Israel, if not at the start, at least at the finish of any unilateral Israeli strike at Iran's nuclear development facilities. The amount of additional and fundamental change any president can achieve with a divided government would be limited. But Obamacare stands by itself, for it represents the tipping point between a constitutional republic and a social democracy, and it would become a fixture. By the time the next presidential election rolls around in 2016, this 2,300-page monstrosity, complete with its crushing regulatory and tax burdens, mandates, and unsustainable costs, would have been the law of the land for a full 6 years, and history has demonstrated that entrenched entitlement programs are almost never abolished. Constitutionalists certainly understand what's at stake in this election, and while they appear likely to show up at the polls in perhaps record numbers, the stakes would not be nearly as high if Justice Roberts had just ruled in a way consistent with his long-standing constitutional principles. But instead, he ultimately sided with the leftist justices. Well, you say, Obamacare was duly approved by the legislative branch, so why should it be reversed by the judicial branch? Well, the U.S. Constitution calls for the Supreme Court to do exactly that if a law exceeds the enumerated powers of the legislative or executive branches. And 4 justices felt the violations were sufficiently clear to shoot down the entire law. In the end, if this president wins a second term, one man will be ultimately responsible for the biggest federal power grab in generations. And that one man won't be Obama, for he had the assistance of many leftist cohorts, including the almost 300 legislators in the House and Senate who voted for Obamacare. That one man is John Roberts.